The boardroom was glass and steel, quiet in the way expensive rooms always are. A long table, leather chairs aligned like ranks. A screen at the far end glowed with a minimalist logo and a single word, confidential. She stood at the side of the table, not seated, not introduced, just standing, arms folded, navy suit pressed sharp, posture calm. The only black woman in the room. The only one not laughing. Across from her, a cluster of executives leaned back in their chairs. Expensive watches caught the light. One of them, a middle-aged man in a charcoal suit, tilted his head, eyes sliding over her like she was furniture that had been placed incorrectly. He smiled. Then he pointed. He didn't lower his voice. "You Chinda Puran," he said, amused. Then, in English, louder, for effect, "Stupid servant." The room erupted. Not shock. Not protest. Laughter. Chairs creaked as men leaned back, enjoying it. Someone slapped the table. Another translated it again for fun, as if repetition made it cleverer. A few glanced at her to see if she'd react, if she'd flinch, apologize, shrink. She didn't move. Her eyes stayed level. Her jaw stayed relaxed. Silence settled around her like armor. They mistook it for confusion. Behind the laughter, a few faces tightened, Western partners who knew something was wrong, but said nothing. Their eyes flicked away. Comfort chose cowardice. The meeting rolled on as if nothing had happened. The man who had pointed kept smiling, now emboldened. He spoke again in Mandarin, faster this time, confident she wouldn't understand. Jokes. Dismissals. The kind that turn people into objects. She listened. Every syllable landed. Every word filed away. Her stillness wasn't surrender. It was preparation. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to Amara Cole. Amara had learned this room a long time ago. The polished table. The laughter that sharpened when it thought no one could hear. She'd been 22 when a man like him had asked her to take notes instead of take the lead. 30 when another had called her support, while signing a deal she structured. This wasn't new. What was new was how confident they were. The presenter clicked to the next slide. Numbers appeared, bold, aggressive, tilted in their favor. The man cleared his throat, enjoying the moment. "Let's finalize," he said. No need to involve her. Another ripple of laughter. Amara didn't look at the screen. She looked at him. Not with anger. With clarity. The room thought the story had already been decided. That the insult was the climax. They were wrong. This was only the opening line. No one addressed her. The meeting continued as if she were a coat rack placed too close to the table. Visible, useful, but not worth acknowledging. Slides advanced. Numbers climbed. Voices overlapped with confidence that hadn't been earned. Amara remained standing. There were empty chairs. Soft leather. Open space. No one offered her a seat. No one asked for her name. When the presenter gestured around the table, his hand skipped over her entirely, like she wasn't part of the room's geometry. "Let's hear from legal," someone said. Legal spoke. Finance followed. Operations chimed in. Each voice carried the same assumption, that she was there to observe, not decide. One of the men leaned toward another and whispered, not quietly enough to hide the intent. "She's probably just taking notes." Another nodded. "Or waiting to translate." A small laugh passed between them. Not cruel. Casual. The kind that pretends innocence. Amara's expression didn't change. She watched the way power moved in the room. How people interrupted only those they respected. How they leaned back when they felt safe. How certainty was performed even when it was hollow. She noticed who avoided eye contact. Who looked at their phones when things got uncomfortable. Who smiled too fast. The man who had insulted her earlier spoke again. This time in English. All professionalism now. "We'll consolidate control after closing," he said. "Efficiency depends on a clear chain of command." His eyes flicked toward her for half a second. Then away. The message was clear, you're not in it. At the far end of the table, a junior analyst shifted in his seat. Young. Neat suit. Too quiet to matter. He glanced at Amara, then back to his laptop, fingers pausing mid-type. He'd been in rooms like this before, where something fell off, but no one named it. She caught his look. Not a plea. Not an apology. Just recognition. Amara gave nothing back. No nod. No reassurance. She wasn't there to recruit courage. A new slide appeared. Term sheets. Percentages tilted sharply to one side. The presenter's voice grew smoother as the terms grew harsher. This structure is standard, he said. Non-negotiable. A few heads nodded automatically. Amara felt the familiar weight of being underestimated settle in. Not heavy, just present. The same weight she'd carried in classrooms where professors assumed she was lost. In meetings where her ideas were repeated by louder voices and praised as original. She had learned not to correct people too early. Silence, she knew, made people reckless. The presenter clicked again. Final approvals can be wrapped today, he said. We don't anticipate objections. He smiled, satisfied. Amara's arms remained folded. Her posture didn't soften. She didn't step forward. Not yet. The room believed it had already placed her. It hadn't occurred to them that she was letting them. The shift was subtle, but it happened. Once the room decided she didn't matter, the restraint disappeared. The man in the charcoal suit leaned back, fingers laced behind his head, and spoke again in Mandarin. Longer this time. Casual. Confident. He didn't bother to check whether anyone else understood, because he wasn't speaking to them. He was speaking around her. A few of the others answered in the same language. Short bursts. Smiles. One of them shook his head, amused, as if sharing an inside joke that didn't deserve translation. Laughter followed. Not loud. Not explosive. Controlled. The kind that signals belonging. Amara listened. She caught every word. Not just the insults, but the assumptions beneath them. That she was decorative. That she was placed there for optics. That whatever decisions were being made would happen without her. One of them said something that made the others chuckle again. Another added a comment, glancing at her shoes, then her folded arms. She doesn't even look prepared, someone muttered, in Mandarin, smooth as silk. The man who'd started it all smirked and said, "Why explain strategy to staff?" A ripple of agreement moved around the table. Across the room, a Western executive laughed a beat too late. Another smiled without sound. No one interrupted. No one asked for English. The meeting had split into layers, those inside the joke, and those expected to endure it. Amara's face remained unreadable. Inside, she mapped the room the way she always did when power tried to hide behind language. Who led the laughter? Who followed it? Who stayed silent because they wanted approval more than fairness? The presenter paused, then continued in English, picking up where he'd left off. We'll streamline oversight, he said. Decision-making needs to stay focused. His eyes flicked toward her again. This time longer. Focused men exclusive. Another executive leaned forward, elbows on the table. No need to complicate things, he added. We already know who's qualified to speak. A few nods. A few murmured agreements. Amara didn't blink. She had seen this pattern before. How people used language like a closed door, how mockery disguised itself as efficiency, how confidence grew louder when it thought it was safe. The junior analyst at the far end shifted again. He opened his mouth, then closed it. His gaze moved from the men laughing to Amara standing alone. She noticed him notice. The man in the charcoal suit spoke once more in Mandarin, softer now, almost dismissive. She's not even reacting. He laughed under his breath. Does she understand any of this? Amara's silence stretched. It pressed against the table, against the glass walls, against the assumption that not speaking meant not knowing. They were getting comfortable. That was the danger. Because people only reveal their worst thinking when they believe no one is listening. And Amara was listening to everything. Not everyone was laughing. On the far side of the table, a man in a slate gray suit shifted in his chair. He'd been introduced earlier as a regional partner. Polished, cautious, the kind of executive who survived by never being the loudest voice in the room. He smiled when others smiled, nodded when consensus formed. But now his smile had thinned. He glanced at Amara, then at the men speaking over her, then back down at his notes, as if the paper might give him permission to disappear. Another executive, European, older, cleared his throat, an instinctive sound that meant this is going too far. He opened his mouth, hesitated, and closed it again. His pen tapped once against the table, then stopped. No one followed up. Silence returned, but it wasn't neutral. It was strained. A quiet agreement to let it continue. Amara felt the shift. The moment when discomfort chose caution. When people recognized the line had been crossed, but decided it wasn't theirs to redraw. She'd seen this too. The way allies revealed themselves not by what they said, but by what they refused to risk. The man in the charcoal suit noticed it as well. He straightened, Sensing. The room settled back into compliance. Power relaxed when it realized it wouldn't be challenged. Let's stay on track, he said, smiling thinly. Time is money. A few chuckles followed. The tension dissolved, not because it was resolved, but because it had been buried. Amara remained where she was. Still standing. Still silent. To the untrained eye, she looked sidelined. To anyone paying attention, she looked deliberate. The junior analyst typed again, slower this time. His screen reflected lines of text he wasn't reading. He watched Amara from the corner of his eye, trying to understand her stillness. Wondering why she hadn't defended herself. Wondering if she needed someone else to. He didn't realize she didn't. Across the table, a woman from compliance adjusted her glasses and glanced at Amara briefly, just long enough to register something unsettling. Not fear. Not embarrassment. Control. The meeting pressed forward. Timelines. Deliverables. Authority mapped as if it were already owned. Every decision excluded her by design. And yet, with each exclusion, the room gave something away. Assumptions spoken out loud. Positions taken without caution. Intent revealed without polish. They were documenting themselves. Amara's gaze moved slowly from face to face, cataloging. Who spoke with confidence? Who deferred? Who laughed too easily? Who avoided her eyes entirely? This was the part most people misunderstood. They thought humiliation weakened you. But humiliation, when endured without panic, made others sloppy. The man in the charcoal suit leaned forward again. We'll formalize leadership alignment internally, he said. No need for external commentary. External. The word hung there. Amara's lips pressed together, not in restraint, but in recognition. They didn't see her as opposition. They saw her as background. And that was exactly why they were about to make their biggest mistake. The laughter faded into a dull hum. Not because it stopped, but because Amara stopped hearing it. For a moment, the boardroom blurred at the edges. The glass walls, the polished table, the men speaking over one another, all of it thinned, like a scene dissolving too slowly. Another room surfaced. Smaller. Warmer. Years earlier. She was 24, standing in a downtown office lobby with a leather portfolio pressed to her chest. First major pitch. First time wearing a suit she couldn't quite afford but knew she needed. A receptionist had smiled politely and asked her to wait. Minutes passed. Then a man walked by, glanced at her, and said, "The cleaning staff comes in after 6. She remembered the heat that rushed to her face. The way she'd opened her mouth to correct him, then stopped. Not because she was unsure, because she realized something else mattered more. He had already decided who she was. The memory shifted. Another room. Another table. Different faces, same tone. "Can you grab coffee?" someone had asked, sliding a mug toward her without looking up. She had grabbed it, set it down, then taken the seat at the head of the table and started the meeting. The flashback snapped shut. Amara was back in the boardroom. No one noticed the change, because there was no visible change at all. Her posture hadn't shifted. Her arms were still folded. Her expression still calm. That was the discipline she'd learned early. Never let memory soften your stance. Around her, the meeting continued. Voices layered over one another. Plans stacked on assumptions stacked on disrespect. The men at the table spoke with the confidence of people who had never been challenged by someone they couldn't categorize. Amara let them talk. Every insult, every aside, every careless phrase added weight. Not to her, but to the moment that was coming. They were building a record without knowing it. Across the table, the junior analyst paused his typing again. He watched her closely now, trying to reconcile the disconnect. If she were truly insignificant, why did she look so steady? He didn't know that steadiness came from repetition, from learning again and again. That outrage spent too early only satisfied the people who wanted to provoke it. Amara had learned to wait. The man in the charcoal suit spoke once more, outlining timelines, projecting certainty. "We'll move forward immediately," he said. "No delays." His tone carried finality. Amara's eyes lifted, just slightly. Not enough to draw attention. Enough to mark the moment. She had let them speak long enough. The room had shown her exactly what it believed. And more importantly, what it assumed it could get away with. The memory didn't hurt anymore. It clarified. Amara unfolded her arms. Not to interrupt. Not yet. But to signal something quieter. A decision, made and settled. This wasn't about proving she belonged. This was about deciding how, and when, to end it. and she already knew the answer. The meeting was nearing its end. You could feel it in the way chairs shifted, in the way voices grew decisive instead of exploratory. Decisions were being spoken aloud now, not discussed, not tested. Claimed. The man in the charcoal suit closed his folder with a soft, satisfied tap. That covers alignment, he said. We'll circulate final documents this afternoon. A murmur of agreement followed. Pens clicked. Laptops began to close. They believed the room belonged to them. Amara took one slow breath. Then she stepped forward. It wasn't dramatic. No sharp movement. No sound made to announce it. Just one measured step that brought her closer to the table. Close enough that her presence could no longer be ignored without intention. The room hesitated. A few heads turned. Not all at once. One, then another. Like people realizing the background had moved. She didn't speak yet. Her gaze settled on the screen at the far end of the room, still glowing with figures and bullet points that assumed her absence. She looked at the numbers the way someone looks at a familiar language, fluently, without effort. Is there a question? The presenter asked, reflexively polite. Amara didn't answer him. She turned instead to the man who had called the meeting to order. The one who had laughed first. The one who believed the moment had passed. Before you adjourn, she said calmly, I'd like to clarify something. The sound of her voice cut through the room. Not loud, not sharp. Controlled. Certain. Conversation stopped. The man raised an eyebrow, surprised more than annoyed. We're short on time, he said. I won't take much, Amara replied. Her tone made it clear she wasn't asking. A pause followed. Brief. Tense. The kind that asks the room to choose whether to resist or listen. No one interrupted. Amara rested one hand lightly on the back of an empty chair. She didn't sit. She didn't need to. Standing had worked for her so far. You've referenced efficiency, she continued. Control. Focus. I want to be sure we're aligned on what those words mean. The man in the charcoal suit leaned back, masking his unease with a practiced smile. I think that's been made clear. Has it? She asked. Her eyes moved around the table, not accusatory, just observant. She was no longer invisible. The room knew it now. At the far end, the junior analyst straightened. His fingers hovered above the keyboard, waiting. Amara reached into her jacket pocket and withdrew her phone, not to check it, not to scroll. She unlocked it with a single motion and glanced down. A name flashed across the screen. She didn't show it to anyone. Before anything is finalized, she said, lifting her eyes again. There's context you may want to consider. The man opened his mouth to respond, but stopped when she raised her gaze to him fully for the first time. There was no challenge in her expression, only readiness. This wasn't an interruption. It was a pivot. And the room, so confident moments ago, felt it, even if it didn't yet understand why. The deal wasn't unraveling. Not yet. But the direction had just changed. And everyone at the table knew it. The room waited. Not patiently, politely. The kind of pause that assumed compliance would follow. The man in the charcoal suit tilted his head, ready to steer things back on track. Amara didn't let him. She looked directly at him now and spoke again, but not in English. Her Mandarin was calm, precise, native in cadence, not academic. The words landed cleanly, without accent, without hesitation. She repeated the sentence he'd said earlier. Every syllable, every insult. She didn't paraphrase. She didn't soften it. She didn't raise her voice. She translated it exactly. Then she paused. The effect was immediate. Chairs stiffened. Smiles collapsed mid-expression. A few executives blinked, confused for half a second. Then realization hit, like a delayed echo. She understood. All of it. The man's face changed color, not dramatically, but enough. His confidence fractured at the edges as he processed what had just happened. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, recalibrating. Amara continued, still in Mandarin. She quoted another remark. Then another. Not the loud ones, the casual ones. The ones meant to stay hidden behind language. She delivered them without commentary, without emotion, as if reading back minutes from a meeting. Silence spread across the table. No one laughed now. She switched back to English, not abruptly, but deliberately. You assumed, she said evenly, that language would protect you. Her gaze swept the room. No accusation. No heat. Just truth. It doesn't. The junior analyst's eyes widened. His fingers began moving again, not typing notes, but recording memory. He knew he was witnessing a moment people would later pretend hadn't happened. The man in the charcoal suit leaned forward, forcing a chuckle that didn't land. "There's been a misunderstanding," he said. Amara met his eyes. "No," she replied. "There's been clarity." She placed her phone face down on the table, not as a threat, not as a prop, as punctuation. "You spoke freely because you believed you were unseen," she continued. "Unaccountable." Her voice never rose. It didn't need to. Across the table, one of the executives shifted uncomfortably. Another glanced toward the door. Someone cleared their throat, loud in the quiet. Amara took a breath. Then she said the sentence that split the room cleanly in two. "I understand every word you said," she continued. "And now, so does everyone else." The air felt different. Thinner. Charged. The man who had laughed first no longer leaned back. His hands were flat on the table now. Grounded. Defensive. Amara straightened. Her posture unchanged, but her presence undeniable. "This meeting doesn't continue the way you planned," she said. Not yet an announcement. Not yet a verdict. But the shift was complete. They had lost the cover they thought they had. And they knew it. Because for the first time since the meeting began, no one spoke. They were listening. The silence didn't break all at once. It cracked. A man near the middle of the table shifted forward, clearing his throat as if sound alone might restore order. "Let's not derail this," he said carefully. "We're here to finalize." Amara nodded once. "Exactly," she replied. She turned toward the screen at the far end of the room. The numbers were still there. The assumptions. The future they had just finished dividing among themselves. "With that in mind," she said, "there's something you should see." She tapped her phone once. The screen behind them changed. Not dramatically. No fanfare. Just a clean transition, as if it had been waiting. A new slide appeared. Her name. Amara Cole, Chief Executive Officer, Cole Meridian Holdings. The room froze. Someone inhaled sharply. Another chair scraped back an inch before its owner realized movement was a mistake. Amara didn't look at the screen. She watched their faces instead, the delayed recognition, the recalculation, the sudden scramble to align memory with reality. "That can't be right," the man in the charcoal suit said quietly. "It is," Amara replied. She took one step closer to the table now, not forward, but into the space they had denied her. No one stopped her. No one could. "My firm holds the controlling interest on the capital structure you've been discussing," she continued. "Including the veto rights you just dismissed as procedural." The junior analyst's eyes darted back to the screen. He knew the numbers. He had run them himself. His posture straightened, equal parts shock and confirmation. One of the executives reached for his folder, flipping pages too quickly. Another pulled out his phone, tapping furiously as if the answer might change if he refreshed it. The man who had laughed first said nothing. Amara rested both hands on the table now. Not aggressively. Ownership didn't need force. "You spoke about efficiency," she said. "About control. About who was qualified to speak." She let the words settle. "Those decisions," she added, "stop here." A ripple of disbelief moved through the room. Someone whispered her name, testing it, as if saying it out loud might soften the reality. The compliance officer adjusted her glasses again, eyes locked on the screen. She didn't look surprised, just resigned. Amara straightened. "I don't need to raise my voice," she said. "I don't need to argue." She looked directly at the man who had called her a servant. "I need to inform you," she continued, "that this deal does not proceed under these terms, or under your assumptions." No one interrupted. No one laughed. The room that had once felt closed now felt exposed, glass walls suddenly transparent. Amara picked up her phone and slid it back into her pocket. "This meeting is over," she said calmly. Not a threat, a fact. And for the first time since it began, everyone at the table understood exactly who had been standing there all along. No one stood up. They had been told the meeting was over, yet every body remained seated, as if movement itself might confirm the loss of control settling over the room. The man in the charcoal suit was the first to speak, though his voice no longer carried authority. "Amara," he said, trying her name for the first time. "Let's not be hasty. We can revisit the language. Clarify intentions." She looked at him, not coldly, not kindly. "Accurately. You already clarified them," she replied. A phone vibrated somewhere down the table. Then another. Quiet at first. Then insistent. Notifications cascading as reality reached people faster than denial could manage. One executive whispered, "Check your email." Another was already scrolling. his face tightening with every line he read. Amara didn't need to look at her phone. She'd sent the message before she stepped forward. The sequence had been decided long before the insult. Across the table, the compliance officer exhaled slowly. "This changes our exposure," she said, more to herself than anyone else. Significantly, the junior analyst's screen refreshed. New instructions populated the task list: urgent, red flagged, unmistakable. His hands moved automatically now, training overriding shock. The man who had laughed first finally spoke. "This is an overreaction," he said, though the words sounded thin even to him. "You can't dismantle a deal over." Amara lifted one finger. He stopped. "You're right," she said calmly. "I can't." She let that sit for half a beat. "I can dismantle it because of governance," she continued. "Because of fiduciary duty. Because I won't authorize capital under leadership that mistakes disrespect for leverage." No one argued that. Because no one could. A folder slid off the table as someone stood up too quickly, papers scattering. Another executive pushed his chair back, pacing once before realizing there was nowhere to go. The man in the charcoal suit stared at the screen behind Amara, still displaying her name, her title. The truth they'd laughed past. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. Amara considered him. "Now," she said, "my office notifies your board that negotiations are suspended. Effective immediately." She paused. "Your access to our capital is frozen pending review." The words landed heavily. "Permanently." The compliance officer nodded once, already accepting the chain reaction. Legal implications. Market whispers. Reputational fallout. This wasn't a confrontation anymore. It was a consequence. Amara straightened her jacket, smoothing a sleeve, not out of nerves, but closure. She looked around the table one last time. "You believe this room belonged to you," she said. That language could shield intent. That silence meant permission. Her gaze settled on the man who had pointed at her. It never did. She turned toward the door. Behind her, no one followed. No one spoke. The room had nothing left to add. As the door closed softly behind her, the boardroom remained. Glass, steel, and suddenly very small. The deal hadn't exploded. It had collapsed under its own weight. Quietly, irreversibly. The hallway outside the boardroom was quiet. Not empty. Just hushed in that way corporate spaces become when something irreversible has happened. Amara walked at an unhurried pace, heels measured against polished stone, her reflection sliding along the glass walls beside her. She didn't look back. Inside the room, voices had returned, but stripped of confidence. Questions overlapped. Damage control replaced dominance. People who had laughed minutes earlier now spoke in careful fragments, each sentence designed to protect themselves first. What did legal say? Who approved this structure? We need to get ahead of this. No one laughed now. Amara reached the end of the corridor and stopped. She took out her phone, not to react, but to confirm. A single message waited. Done. Capital freeze initiated. Board notified. She exhaled, not relief, not triumph. Resolution. This was never about emotion. It was about standards. Behind her, the door to the boardroom opened briefly. The man in the charcoal suit stepped out, straightening his jacket as if posture could still restore authority. He hesitated when he saw her, then spoke. "Amara," he said, quieter than before. "This didn't have to happen this way." She turned. For the first time since the meeting began, she faced him without an agenda. "It did," she replied. He swallowed. "We were joking." She held his gaze. "No," she said. "You were revealing." The word landed harder than accusation ever could. He searched her face for anger, for satisfaction, something he could negotiate with. He found neither. "You never asked who I was," she continued evenly. "You decided. And then you spoke as if your assumptions carried no cost." He looked down the hall, as if help might arrive late and unannounced. None did. "What happens to us?" he asked. Amara considered the question. "That depends," she said, "on what you do after this room stops protecting you." She turned again and walked on. As she entered the elevator, her reflection met her eyes, steady, composed, unchanged. The doors slid shut, sealing the quiet behind her. Downstairs, the city moved as it always did. People crossed streets. Phones rang. Deals were signed. Others quietly died. Amara stepped out into the light. The story would spread, she knew. Whispers first, then headlines shaped by people who hadn't been there. Some would say she overreacted. Others would say she was lucky. Neither mattered. What mattered was this. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't defended her dignity. She had enforced it. And somewhere above her, in a room full of glass and regret, people were learning a lesson that no language barrier could hide from. Silence, they would realize too late, was never ignorance. It was restraint. And restraint, when released, carried weight. By nightfall, the room no longer belonged to them. Emails had leaked, not the dramatic kind, just the quiet confirmations that mattered. Suspended. Pending review. Effective immediately. The language of consequence spread through inboxes faster than apologies ever could. Inside the firm, calendars emptied. Meetings were postponed. Calls went unanswered. People who had laughed earlier now spoke in lowered voices, choosing words the way one chooses footing on ice. The junior analyst sat alone at his desk long after others had left. He replayed the meeting in his head, not the insult, but the stillness that followed it. He drafted a memo he wasn't sure he'd send, documenting exactly what he'd heard, exactly when. Accuracy felt like the only safe thing left. Across town, compliance convened an emergency call. The officer adjusted her glasses and spoke plainly. "This isn't reputational risk," she said. "It's governance failure." No one disagreed. Silence had lost its utility. The man in the charcoal suit faced his board under harsh light. He tried to explain tone, intent, culture. None of it landed. Questions cut cleanly. Why wasn't this disclosed? Why wasn't she acknowledged? Who approved the language? No one raised a hand. Somewhere between the third and fourth question, the truth surfaced, not spoken, but understood. The problem wasn't one sentence. It was the permission to say it. By morning, a statement circulated, carefully worded. Regret without admission. Commitment without change. It satisfied no one. Amara read it once and set it aside. She sat in her office, walls warm, quiet, intentional, and reviewed the brief her team had prepared overnight. Markets would adjust. Partners would posture. Some doors would close. Others would open. Her assistant paused at the doorway. "They're asking if you want to comment." Amara shook her head. "Not yet." She stood and walked to the window. Below, the city moved on, indifferent to the lesson unfolding above it. That was fine. Lessons didn't need audiences to be real. Later that day, she met with her board. No theatrics, just alignment. Standards reaffirmed. A simple line added to the agenda, proposed by Amara and adopted without debate. Zero tolerance for dehumanization, by word or by structure. It passed unanimously. In the afternoon, a message arrived from an unfamiliar address. Short, direct, an apology that acknowledged harm without explanation. She read it, then archived it. Forgiveness wasn't her job. As evening settled, Amara closed her laptop and gathered her coat. She didn't feel victorious. She felt finished, with the moment, with the noise. On her way out, she passed a framed quote she'd hung years ago, barely noticeable unless you stopped to read it. Dignity doesn't demand recognition. It demands enforcement. She turned off the lights and left the office. The reckoning would continue without her. It always did. The next morning arrived without ceremony. No headlines waited for Amara when she woke. No alerts demanded response. Just light through the windows and the quiet certainty that the decision had already done its work. She dressed simply. No armor. No signals. By the time she arrived at her office, the world had begun to adjust. Markets moved. Partners recalibrated. Conversations shifted tone. The kind of change that doesn't announce itself, but leaves fingerprints everywhere. Amara stood alone for a moment before her desk, hands resting lightly on its edge. This was the part people misunderstood. They thought power revealed itself in confrontation, in raised voices, in public victory laps. It didn't. Power revealed itself in standards. Her assistant entered, holding a tablet. "They're asking for one sentence," she said. "Just a statement. Something brief." Amara considered it. Not because she needed permission, but because words, once released, carried weight she never wasted. She nodded. "All right." The tablet was set down. The room waited. Amara spoke slowly, not for effect, but for accuracy. "I didn't raise my voice," she said. "I raised the standard." Her assistant looked up. "That's it?" she asked. Amara nodded. "That's all there is." The statement was released an hour later. It traveled far, farther than outrage ever did. Quoted, reposted, debated by people who had never been in that room, but recognized the truth of it instantly. She didn't read the reactions. She didn't need to. Later that afternoon, Amara walked through the city alone. No entourage. No rush. She passed reflections in glass. Women pausing mid-step. Men glancing twice. Not because they recognized her, but because something about her composure registered. Dignity has a gravity to it. At a crosswalk, a young woman in a blazer stood beside her, nervous energy humming. She glanced at Amara, then away, then back again. I just wanted to say, the woman said quietly, thank you. I saw what happened. Amara met her eyes. Then remember it, she replied. And don't wait for permission. The light changed. They crossed in opposite directions. That evening, Amara returned home as the city dimmed. She poured a glass of water, not wine. Sat in silence. Let the day close around her without ceremony. Somewhere, boardrooms were being restructured. Policies rewritten. Language reconsidered. Not out of fear, but out of awareness that silence could no longer be mistaken for absence. Amara stood at the window and watched the lights come on, one by one. She hadn't demanded respect. She had demonstrated consequence. And that was the difference. The story wouldn't end with applause. It would continue in rooms where no one dared assume ignorance again. In meetings where silence was listened to, not exploited. Amara turned away from the window. Tomorrow, there would be more work. But tonight, the standard held. And that was enough.